They said I was the soul of the vineyard, but a soul can't sign a distribution deal. A soul can't sit at the head of a boardroom table. For 10 years, I was the one with dirt under my nails and vinesap stains on my jeans. I was Lorelei, the daughter who spoke the language of the soil, who could tell by the curl of a leaf if a frost was coming, or if the soil needed iron. Our family vineyard wasn't just my job, it was the marrow in my bones, but my father saw things differently. He saw the world through spreadsheets and profit margins, a language I understood but didn't love. And in that world, my brother Lincoln was fluent. The day it all shattered wasn't stormy or dramatic. It was a perfect, sun-drenched Tuesday in the tasting room, the kind of day that makes the tourists flock and the wine flow. My father called a family meeting. I assumed it was about the upcoming harvest projections. I'd spent the morning walking the rows, my boots sinking into the rich, familiar loam, and I had good news. The Cabernet Sauvignon grapes were showing exceptional sugar levels. I had the numbers, the data, the evidence written in the language of the earth. I walked into the newly renovated tasting room, a place Lincoln had redesigned. It was all gray stone and cold steel, a far cry from the warm oak and worn-in leather I grew up with. He'd replaced character with a sterile corporate chic that felt like a betrayal in itself. My father stood at the head of a long polished table, a place he always occupied. Lincoln was beside him, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first car. He had a smug, self-satisfied look on his face, the one he got when he closed a marketing deal or landed a mention in some vapid lifestyle magazine. My father cleared his throat, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. He spoke about the future, about legacy, about adapting to a new market. It was all preamble, the verbal equivalent of circling a landing spot before the wheels touched down. And then they did. He announced he was stepping back from day-to-day operations. A small, hopeful flutter went through my chest, a foolish, naive little bird that was about to be shot from the sky. He was officially handing the presidency of the company to Lincoln. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He praised Lincoln's business degree, his vision, his fresh perspective. He talked about rebranding, about pushing into new markets, about a future that sounded slick and glossy and utterly soulless. He never once mentioned my name, not once. 10 years of my life, of my sweat and my knowledge, erased in a single sterile speech. I just stood there, my hands still faintly smelling of earth and vine leaves. I felt the eyes in the room on me, the pitying glances from the longtime staff who knew. They knew who fixed the irrigation lines in the dead of night. They knew who stayed up through a frost warning, lighting smudge pots to save a vulnerable crop. They knew who could taste a wine and identify not just the grape, but the specific block of land it came from. They knew, and they knew this was a profound injustice. Lincoln, sensing the tension, decided to speak. He clapped a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look inclusive, but felt like an anchor. He said, "Lorelei will of course continue to be an essential part of our operation. She's our dirt girl, the best there is. We need her on the ground, making sure the product is good, while we handle the business of selling it." Dirt girl. The words weren't a compliment, they were a cage. They were a neat little box to put me in, a label that defined my ceiling. Essential, but unsuited for leadership. The foundation, but never the architect. The soul, but never the mind. A quiet heat flushed up my neck, but my face remained a mask of calm. I learned long ago that in a world run by men like my father and brother, emotion was a weapon they would use against you. I gave a small, tight-lipped nod. I looked at my father, searching his eyes for some flicker of doubt, some acknowledgement of what he was doing. I found nothing but the cool, distant resolve of a man who had made a business decision. To him, that's all this was. A choice between two assets. One was a reliable, well-worn piece of machinery. The other was a flashy, new, upgraded model. He chose the upgrade. I didn't say a word. I didn't fight. I didn't plead my case. What was the point? They had already rendered their verdict. I simply turned and walked out of the cold, steel and glass room, leaving their new future behind. As I walked past the edge of our property, my eyes fell on the adjacent plot of land, a steep, rocky, high-altitude hill they had always mocked. The Overlook, my grandfather used to call it, a worthless piece of scrubland, my father always said. Too high, too cold, too exposed. Nothing could ever grow there, and in that moment, standing on the edge of my own erasure, a new kind of seed was planted, not in the soil, but in the cold, hard ground of my own resolve. While Lincoln was busy designing new labels and planning release parties, I was going to cultivate the very dirt they left behind. I was going to build an empire from the stones they threw at me, and that's the story I want to share with you. The story of how the dirt girl built a legacy they said was impossible. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told you weren't enough, stick around. It helps to know I'm not screaming into the void. The drive home was a blur of green and gold, the familiar landscape of the valley feeling alien and hostile. The winding roads I used to love, the ones that hugged the curves of the hills, now felt like they were trying to squeeze the air from my lungs. I pulled over at a scenic viewpoint, the very one my grandfather had named the Overlook. From here you could see our entire vineyard spread out like a patchwork quilt, row after perfect row, a testament to 3 generations of work. My work. I could see the block of Merlot I'd saved from blight 3 years ago, the Chardonnay vines I'd personally grafted. My hands were all over that land. My signature was written in every thriving row, and now I was a ghost haunting my own creation. The car was silent, but my mind was a screaming chaos of memories and resentments. The breakdown, when it came, wasn't a torrent of tears. It was a single hot tear that slid down my cheek, a quiet, final surrender to the grief of the moment. It was the end of a chapter. It was the end of Lorelei, the loyal daughter. A cold, hard clarity began to settle in its place. This wasn't just a job I'd lost. It was my identity, and I realized I had 2 choices. I could let them erase me, or I could write a new story. Flashbacks played in my head, unbidden. Me at 8 years old, trailing my grandfather through the vineyard, his hands, gnarled and stained purple from a lifetime of harvests, showing me how to gently pinch off a sucker leaf. He'd let me taste a single perfect grape, and he'd say, "Listen to the vine, Lori. It'll tell you what it needs." He was the one who taught me that winemaking wasn't a formula. It was a conversation with the land. He saw the gift in me, the intuitive connection I had to the soil. But he was from a different generation, a man who believed in tradition and bloodlines. He'd passed the vineyard to my father, his son, as was expected. He'd assumed my father would see what he saw in me. He was wrong. Another memory surfaced. Me, 22, fresh out of university, with a degree in viticulture and oenology, a specialization I'd chosen to serve the family business. I came home, bursting with new ideas about sustainable farming and yeast cultivation. My father listened politely, then told me to run my ideas by the vineyard manager he'd hired, a man who still used pesticides that had been outdated for a decade. My contributions were treated as suggestions, interesting theories from the owner's daughter, not as the expert strategies they were. Meanwhile, Lincoln was at a prestigious business school, his tuition paid for by the profits from the grapes I was tending. His summer visits were like royal processions. He'd walk through the vineyard in pristine white sneakers, talking about brand synergy and market penetration, while I was covered in mud, repairing a faulty drip irrigation line. My father would beam at him. He'd see a leader. He'd look at me and see a laborer. I remembered the year we had a late, unexpected hailstorm. It was catastrophic. It threatened to destroy half our Pinot Noir crop, the most valuable and delicate grapes we had. Lincoln was on a networking trip in Napa. My father was panicking, on the phone with the insurance company. I was out in the field, organizing the entire crew, working for 36 hours straight. We salvaged what we could, working meticulously, cutting away the damaged fruit vine by vine to prevent rot from spreading. We saved 70% of the crop. It was a monumental effort of logistics, leadership, and pure grit. When Lincoln returned, My father threw a dinner to celebrate our resilience. At the table, Lincoln presented a slideshow about a new marketing campaign he'd conceived on his trip. He called it Resilience in a Bottle. He'd designed a new label featuring a stylized image of a storm. He never mentioned my role in the salvage. My father toasted him, his eyes shining with pride. My brother, turning a crisis into an opportunity. They sold more wine that year than ever before, all built on a story I had bled for. I received a pat on the back and the title of Best Vineyard Manager in the Valley. It was another label, another gilded cage. It was a way of praising my work while denying me the authority that should have come with it. It wasn't about revenge then. I told myself it was about loyalty, about family, about preserving my grandfather's legacy. But standing there, on that overlook, I saw that loyalty for what it was, a one-way street. The legacy they were building had no room for me at the helm. The catalyst wasn't just the humiliation. It was a memory, a quiet promise I had made to myself years ago. It was about the worthless plot of land right in front of me, the overlook. It belonged to an old man named Elias Vance. Elias was a legend in the valley, a bit of a recluse. He and my grandfather had been friends and rivals, two old titans of the grape. Elias believed in radical ideas, in planting unconventional, cool climate varietals that everyone else considered folly for our region. He was a pioneer who never quite got his due. People called him a dreamer, an eccentric. My father called him a cautionary tale. I remembered visiting him with my grandfather as a little girl. His hands were just as gnarled as my grandfather's, but his eyes had a different kind of fire. He wasn't a traditionalist. He was a revolutionary. He'd shown me a single stubborn vine growing on that windswept hill. He said, "Everyone thinks this land is cursed. They see the rock, the wind, the altitude. They see a fight, but I see character, grapes that have to struggle for survival." He'd told me, "Develop a complexity and a depth that you can't find in the easy, fertile soil of the valley floor." It was a lesson that had burrowed deep into my soul. I drove straight from the overlook to my small cottage on the edge of the family property, and the first thing I did was pull out my financials. For years I had lived frugally. While Lincoln was buying new cars and expensive suits, I was investing. I'd taken the bonuses my father had given me, guilt money, I now realized, and I'd put them away. I didn't know what I was saving for. Maybe just an escape hatch. I looked at the number. It was substantial enough. I went to my laptop and began my research. Elias Vance had passed away 2 years ago. The property was now held in a trust managed by his daughter, who lived out of state and had no interest in winemaking. The land was listed, but it had sat on the market for over a year. The asking price was laughably low for its acreage, a testament to how worthless everyone believed it to be. The local real estate agent's listing even used the word challenging terrain. It was a warning to most. To me, it was an invitation. My resolve hardened from a liquid idea into something solid, something I could build on. This was the moment, the turning point. The quiet breakdown in the car was over. Now the cold, calculated fury took its place. It was the feeling I got right before a harvest, a focused energy where every decision mattered. Every action had a consequence. I wasn't going to fight them for their vineyard. That was a losing battle, a game played on their turf by their rules. I was going to change the game entirely. I was going to build something on the land they mocked, with the grapes they said couldn't grow, and I would create a wine that would make them irrelevant. I started drafting an email, not to my father, not to Lincoln, but to a soil consultant in France I'd read about. A woman who specialized in high-altitude, cool climate viticulture. The subject line was simple, challenging terroir. It wasn't about revenge. I kept telling myself that. It was about proving them wrong. It was about proving my grandfather, and Elias, right. It was about building a parachute after they'd pushed me out of the plane. The funny thing is, I was starting to realize I was a much better engineer than they ever gave me credit for. The fall wouldn't kill me. It would just give me time to think. The plan began, not with a bang, but with a quiet, legal transaction. I contacted a lawyer, not a local one, but a sharp, discreet professional from the city who specialized in agricultural real estate. I set up a shell corporation, a blandly named entity that couldn't be traced back to me, with a casual search. It felt cloak and dagger, but I knew my father and Lincoln. If they caught wind that I was buying the Overlook plot, they would have intervened, not because they wanted it, but purely to stop me from having it. Their egos wouldn't allow the dirt girl to have ambitions beyond their own fence line. The purchase went through smoothly. The trust was happy to offload the worthless land. For the price of one of Lincoln's new oversized fermentation tanks, I became the owner of 50 acres of rock, wind, and possibility. My first act as a landowner was to walk the property, not as a visitor, but as its custodian. It was even more challenging than I remembered. The wind was relentless, a constant pressure that had stunted the few native trees into gnarled, twisted shapes. The soil was thin and rocky, more shale and granite than loam. From the highest point, I could see my family's vineyard below, a perfect, orderly world of green. Up here it was wild, untamed. It was a place you had to listen to, not command. I spent weeks just doing that. I took dozens of soil samples from every quadrant of the property, labeling them meticulously. I sent them off to the French consultant, Dr. Annelise Dubois. Her initial report was daunting. The soil was acidic, low in nitrogen, but surprisingly rich in certain minerals, potassium and magnesium, a direct result of the decomposing granite. She confirmed what Elias had always believed. It was a terrible place to grow the easy, popular grapes like Cabernet or Chardonnay. But for certain varietals, the ones that loved a struggle, it could be extraordinary. This began my secret education. My days were a careful charade. I continued my work at the family vineyard, going through the motions. I oversaw the harvest that Lincoln was now taking credit for, ensuring the quality remained high out of a stubborn, residual pride. I was quiet, compliant, a ghost in my own machine. I kept my head down, which they misinterpreted as defeat. They thought I was broken. In reality, I was more focused than I had ever been in my life. My nights and weekends belonged to the Overlook. I devoured Annelise's reports and recommendations. We had long video calls, where she, a world-renowned expert, treated me as a peer. She didn't see a dirt girl. She saw a fellow scientist. She recommended 2 specific grape varietals: Zweigelt, a hardy Austrian red that thrives in cool climates and produces a spicy, vibrant wine; Gruner Veltliner, a white grape known for its crisp acidity and notes of white pepper, a grape that loves mineral-rich, challenging soils. Neither was grown anywhere else in our valley. They were a gamble, a huge one. The physical work was brutal. I couldn't afford a crew, not yet, so I did it myself. I cleared scrub brush by hand. I hired a local contractor with an excavator for a single day to dig deep trenches, not for planting, but so I could study the soil stratigraphy, the layers of rock and clay. I needed to understand the land's bones. This was the part of the work I loved, the part they never understood. It was a puzzle, a conversation. Lincoln was busy with focus groups, debating whether their new rosé should have a millennial pink or a salmon pink label. I was on my hands and knees, crumbling soil between my fingers, trying to decide where to build my windbreaks. My first ally came from an unexpected place. A man named Matteo, one of the most senior cellar hands at my family's vineyard. He approached me one afternoon. He was a quiet, proud man who had worked the land since before I was born. He'd seen my grandfather, my father, and now Lincoln take the helm. He came to me while I was checking the pH levels in a batch of Chardonnay. He spoke in a low voice, almost a whisper. He said, "They are ruining it, Lorelei. Lincoln bought a new filtration system. It strips the wine, makes it clean," he says. "It makes it tasteless."
Nap.
He is listening to marketing consultants, not the grapes. Matteo's words were a confirmation of my worst fears. Lincoln wasn't just soulless in his marketing, he was incompetent in his winemaking. He was chasing a generic, mass-market taste profile, sacrificing the very character that had made our wines special. Matteo started feeding me information, quiet updates, production schedules, notes from the disastrous tasting meetings, where Lincoln's new, thin wines were being approved. It wasn't about sabotage, it was about preservation. Matteo loved that vineyard as much as I did, and he saw it being destroyed from the inside out. He also started helping me on my days off. He'd show up at the overlook, his old pickup truck, rattling up the dusty track. He never said much. He'd just grab a shovel and start working alongside me. He brought with him decades of practical knowledge, a wisdom that no textbook could teach. He showed me how to build the windbreaks from reclaimed lumber, angling them just so, to create pockets of calm air where the young vines could thrive. He helped me install the drip irrigation system, a complex network designed to deliver precise amounts of water to each individual plant, a necessity in this thin soil. He was my hidden leverage, my man on the inside. But more than that, he was my first believer. His presence was a silent testament that my vision wasn't crazy. The second part of the plan was the long game, planting. I ordered the rootstock from a specialized nursery in Austria that Annalise recommended. The day they arrived was terrifying and exhilarating. They were just small, dormant sticks, bundles of potential. Matteo and I spent a solid week planting them, one by one. It was backbreaking, sacred work. As I pressed the soil around the base of each fragile vine, I felt like I was burying my old life and planting a new one. For the next 3 years, my life was a cycle of quiet, relentless effort. I nurtured those vines like they were my children. I fought off pests with organic, sustainable methods. I enriched the soil with compost I made myself. I learned the unique personality of my plot of land, where the morning sun hit first, where the frost tended to settle, where the wind was the most fierce. I was building my secret weapon, not in a lab, but right there in the dirt. Meanwhile, at the family vineyard, Lincoln's changes were in full swing. He launched a new line of canned wines called Vineyard Vibes, with cartoonish labels and sickly sweet flavors. It was a short-term success with a younger, less discerning crowd, but it horrified their traditional customer base. Their premium wines, the ones now being made with his clean filtration methods, started getting mediocre reviews. The complexity was gone. The soul was gone. My father, I heard through Matteo, was growing worried, but his pride was too deeply invested in Lincoln's success. He'd chosen his horse. He couldn't admit it was a lame one. During this time, I never spoke of my project. To my family, I was just the quiet, defeated dirt girl, doing her job. They had no idea that just over the hill, a revolution was taking root. It wasn't about revenge. It was about cultivation. It was about creating something so undeniable in its quality that it would speak for itself. My 50 acres of worthless land were now covered in rows of thriving, vibrant green vines. They weren't as lush or as orderly as the ones on the valley floor, but they were tough. They had character. They had struggled, and in that struggle, they were becoming something extraordinary. I had my foresight in the form of Dr. Dubois' science, my ally in Matteo's unwavering loyalty, and my hidden leverage was growing right out of the rocky soil. The quiet was about to end. The harvest was coming. The first harvest was small. The yield from the young vines was tiny, precious. Matteo and I did it all by hand, just the two of us, over a long weekend. We picked the grapes at night, under portable lights, to keep them cool and preserve their delicate acidity. The fruit was incredible. The Gruner Veltliner grapes were small and intensely flavored, tasting of citrus and green apple, with a strange, exciting hint of something mineral like wet stone. The Ziegelt grapes were a deep, dark purple, almost black, with a perfect balance of sugar and tannin. This was the moment of truth. You can have the best grapes in the world, but it all comes down to what happens in the winery. My winery was a small, temperature-controlled barn at the back of my property. It wasn't fancy. I'd bought used equipment, a small press, a few stainless steel fermentation tanks, a handful of neutral oak barrels. I didn't have Lincoln's massive, computer-controlled machinery. I had my senses, my knowledge, and a meticulous attention to detail. I fermented the wines slowly, at low temperatures, wanting to preserve every nuance of flavor. I was a nervous wreck for months, tasting the wine daily, tracking its progress, barely sleeping. Matteo would find me in the barn at all hours, a wine thief in my hand, a worried look on my face. He would just nod, a silent encouragement. When the wine was finally ready for its first bottling, I had to give it a name. It's Rios, its overlook. It was a nod to my grandfather, to the land itself, and a quiet, defiant statement to those in the valley below. The label was simple, elegant, a line drawing of the gnarled, wind-beaten tree that stood at the highest point of my property. No focus groups, no marketing gimmicks, just the name, the varietal, and the story in the bottle. I bottled less than 300 cases. It felt like a lifetime of work, condensed into a few thousand bottles. Now came the first move in what I was starting to think of as a quiet coup. I didn't send my wine to local shops. I didn't try to get it into restaurants. I knew that would alert my family. Instead, I carefully packed 12 bottles. I sent them with a short handwritten note to a dozen of the most influential and forward-thinking sommeliers and wine critics in the country. People who were known for discovering new talent, for championing the unusual. I didn't ask for a review. I just said, I've made something I believe is unique to our valley. I would be honored if you would taste it. Then I waited. The silence was deafening. Weeks went by. Nothing. I started to doubt myself. Maybe the wine wasn't as good as I thought. Maybe my palate was biased. Maybe my father and brother were right all along. Maybe I was just a girl playing in the dirt. Matteo remained stoic. He told me, good things take time. Lincoln, meanwhile, was preparing for the annual regional wine competition, the one our family vineyard had dominated for years. He was entering his new, clean Cabernet. He was so confident. He'd already sent out a press release hinting at a big win. The first ripple came not from a critic, but from a blog post by a well-known sommelier in San Francisco. The title was, "The best wine you've never heard of is coming from a place you'd never expect." He wrote about my Gruner Veltliner. He called it electric, vibrant, a paradigm shift for the region. He praised its minerality, its complexity. He didn't know who I was, or the story behind the wine, but he knew what was in the glass. Suddenly, my phone started ringing. Other critics who had let the bottle sit in their cellars were now opening it. The buzz started, a low hum at first, then a growing chorus. The real earthquake hit when the results of the Sommelier's Gold National Awards were announced. It was a prestigious competition, judged blind by master sommeliers. Overlook, Gruner Veltliner won double gold, the highest honor. My Zweigelt won gold. I was at home checking my email when I saw the press release. I had to read it 3 times before it sank in. I had won, not just won. I had beaten hundreds of established wineries from across the country. I walked out to the edge of my property, the award email glowing on my phone screen. I looked down at my family's vineyard. The lights were on in the main house. I could only imagine the scene inside. The panic at the family vineyard didn't start immediately. They dismissed my win as a fluke. Lincoln, I heard from Matteo, was condescending. He said, "It's a niche wine, a novelty. Good for her, but it's not a real business." His own wine, the flagship Cabernet, had only received a silver at the regional competition, a stunning fall from grace. He blamed the judges, the weather, anything but his own methods. The first sign that their world was tilting came from their primary distributor, a man named Arthur Harrison. Harrison was old school, a powerful figure who controlled which wines made it onto the shelves of the best restaurants and retailers in the state. His relationship with our family went back to my grandfather's time. Matteo told me Harrison had called a meeting with my father and Lincoln. He was concerned about the declining quality and the lackluster sales of their premium line. He mentioned the bad reviews. Then he dropped the bomb. He said, "You know, the most exciting thing coming out of this valley right now is this new label, Overlook. Have you heard of it? The name is on every sommelier's lips." The silence in the room, Matteo said, was profound. Lincoln, flustered, tried to brush it off. Just some small batch stuff from the crazy old Vance property. My father, however, was quiet. The pieces were starting to click into place for him. The worthless plot, his quiet, defeated daughter. He knew. He didn't say it, but he knew. Harrison wasn't a man to be trifled with. He was a businessman, and his business was selling exceptional wine. He tracked me down. He didn't call. He just showed up one morning, driving his sleek black sedan up my dusty, unpaved road. He got out of the car, looking impeccable in a tailored suit that seemed out of place in my rustic little slice of the world. He introduced himself, his eyes taking in everything: the small barn, the hardy-looking vines, the windbreaks. He asked to taste the wine. I took him into my small, functional tasting room, which was really just a clean corner of the barn, with a simple wooden table and a few glasses. I poured him the Gruner Veltliner. He held it up to the light, swirled it, inhaled its aroma. He took a sip. He closed his eyes. He was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then he opened his eyes, looked directly at me, and said one word: astonishing. He tasted the Zweigelt next, his reaction just as profound. He asked me about the land, the grapes, my methods. I told him everything. I didn't mention my family. I didn't have to. The story was in the wine. He knew quality when he tasted it, and he knew what was happening just down the hill. He saw the whole picture. Before he left, he looked at me and said, "Young lady, you have a problem. You have created a product that is about to be in very high demand, and you have no way to get it to market. I have a solution. Let's talk." That was the moment the ground truly shifted. It wasn't about an award anymore. It was about power. The power to control distribution. The power that my father and brother had always taken for granted. And it was about to slip through their fingers. The exodus began with a single, devastating email. Arthur Harrison sent a formal notice to my father, informing him that he would not be renewing his exclusivity contract for their premium wine portfolio for the upcoming year. He cited declining quality and a shift in market interest. In market interest, it was corporate speak for "you're no longer the best." As a courtesy, he said he would continue to distribute their lower-tier products, including the Vineyard Vibes canned wine. But the lucrative steakhouse and fine dining accounts were being re-evaluated. This was a death blow. Those high-end accounts weren't just about volume, they were about prestige. They were the foundation of the brand's reputation, a reputation my grandfather had spent a lifetime building, and that Lincoln had dismantled in less than 2 years. The very next day, Harrison's office sent a contract to my shell company. It was an exclusive distribution deal for Overlook. He wanted every single bottle I could produce. The terms were stunningly generous. He wasn't just offering to distribute my wine, he was offering to invest, to provide the capital I needed to expand my production, to build a proper winery, to hire a small crew. He was betting on me. He was betting on the dirt girl. The panic at the family vineyard turned into a full-blown crisis. Matteo described the atmosphere as a war room with no strategy. Lincoln was lashing out, blaming Harrison, blaming the critics, blaming the changing tastes of consumers. He refused to accept that the problem was his own creation. My father, older and perhaps a little wiser, understood the gravity of the situation. He knew that losing Harrison wasn't just losing a distributor, it was losing the keystone that held the entire arch of their business together. Then came the desperate counter. My brother, in an act of breathtaking arrogance and cluelessness, drove up to my property. It was the first time he had ever set foot on the Overlook. He walked around, a look of disbelief on his face as he saw the healthy, mature vines and the small, efficient winery. He didn't apologize. He didn't offer congratulations. He launched into a pitch. He said, "Look, Lori, you've done a great job here. It's a cute little project. You've made your point. So here's the deal. We'll buy you out. We'll absorb Overlook's as a premium boutique label under the family brand. We'll even give you a fancy title, Director of High Altitude Viticulture. How does that sound?" I just looked at him. I let the silence hang in the air. He was offering me another cage, a slightly nicer one, but a cage nonetheless. He still didn't get it. He saw my success only in terms of how it could serve him. I didn't say anything. I just handed him a glass of the Gruner Veltliner. He took a sip, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine shock in his eyes. The quality was undeniable. It was better than anything they had produced in years. He finally understood. This wasn't a cute project. This was a threat. His tone shifted. He tried a different tactic. Family. He said, Dad is worried. This is tearing the family apart. We should be working together. We're stronger together. This line, after everything, was the one that broke my composure. A small, dry laugh escaped my lips. I said, we weren't together when you took my job. We weren't together when you called me the dirt girl. We weren't together when you built your brand on my work, and then tried to filter the soul out of every bottle. You didn't want a partner, Lincoln. You wanted a subordinate, and that position is no longer available. He stared at me, his face turning red. The last vestiges of his slick corporate charm fell away, revealing the panicked, entitled man underneath. He said, you can't do this, Lorelei. You can't build an empire from our scraps. I looked him dead in the eye. I already did. He left, his car kicking up dust as he sped away. The power shift was complete. It wasn't just about clients or contracts anymore. It was about respect. I had finally earned it, not by asking for it, but by commanding it through sheer, undeniable competence. The final confrontation wasn't a dramatic showdown in a boardroom. It was quiet, just as my revolution had been. A week after Lincoln's disastrous visit, my father called. His voice was tired, stripped of its usual authority. He asked if he could come see me, alone. He arrived that afternoon, looking older than I had ever seen him. He walked the land slowly, his hands behind his back, the way he used to when he was deep in thought. He didn't speak for a long time. He just looked at the vines, at the soil, at the small barn that was now the most talked about winery in the state. We sat at the simple wooden table, the same place I had sat with Arthur Harrison. I poured him a glass of the Zweigelt. He held it, studying the deep ruby color. He took a sip, and his shoulders slumped. It was a gesture of profound, unspoken defeat. He said, your grandfather would have loved this. He would have been proud. It was the closest he could get to an apology, and in that moment, I knew it was the best I was ever going to get from him. Then he shifted into business mode. It was the only way he knew how to communicate. He said, Lincoln is struggling. The brand is in trouble. We need to consolidate. We want to make you an offer. We'll make you a full partner, equal shares. We'll merge Overlook with the family brand. Your wine will be the new flagship. My name, he said, on the letterhead right next to his and Lincoln's. It was the very thing I might have killed for 2 years ago. The recognition, the power, the title. But hearing it now, it felt hollow. I let him finish. I let him lay out the entire desperate proposal. When he was done, I looked at him calmly and said, he looked stunned. But why? This is everything you ever wanted. I shook my head gently. No, it's everything you thought I wanted. What I wanted was to build something of my own. Something that couldn't be given or taken away, and I've done that. I told him about my deal with Harrison. I told him about the expansion plans. I explained in calm, professional terms that Overlooks was not for sale. It was not a component to be absorbed. It was the future. And then I delivered the final quiet blow. I looked at him and said, you were right about one thing all those years ago. I am a dirt girl. I'm not suited for the kind of business you and Lincoln want to run. I'm not interested in marketing gimmicks and focus groups. I'm interested in what's in the soil. And it turns out the soil on this worthless hill is worth more than your entire brand right now. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was its own quiet thunder. He just nodded, stood up, and left. There was nothing more to say. The new reality had set in. He hadn't come to my winery to make a deal. He had come to surrender. 2 months later, the news broke in a trade publication. My father was officially retiring. Lincoln was being reassigned to oversee marketing for their low-end canned wine division. A public and humiliating demotion. They had been forced to sell a majority stake in the family vineyard to a national conglomerate just to stay afloat. The name would remain, but the family's control was gone. It happened off-screen, a consequence of their own arrogance and incompetence. It wasn't about revenge. I told myself that again, and this time it felt truer. I hadn't destroyed their legacy. They had auctioned it off. I had simply built a better one next door. My new throne wasn't a chair in their cold, sterile boardroom. It was 50 acres of rocky, windswept land. It was a state of balance, of clarity, of my own making. Today there's a small, simple sign at the bottom of my driveway. It just says Overlook Vineyards. My name is on the company registration, not as a partner, not as a director of some convoluted title, but as founder. In my new office, a beautiful space overlooking the vines that my team and I built with the profits from our first 2 years, I have something framed on the wall. It's a printout of that first blog post from the San Francisco sommelier, the one that called my wine electric. It's a reminder that true value isn't determined by a family name or a fancy title, but by the quality of your work. The work speaks for itself, if you give it a voice. My story isn't unique. Maybe it wasn't a vineyard for you. Maybe it was a boardroom, a design studio, a hospital, a law firm. Maybe you were the numbers guy, or the creative girl, or the fixer, the one they called essential, but never saw as a leader. We've all been in a room where our contribution was minimized, our potential was capped, and our identity was defined by someone else's limited imagination. They put you in a box, not because of what you are, but because of what they fear you could become. My story is about what happens when you stop trying to get them to see your worth and start building a world where your worth is the foundation. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. It was about taking the dirt they threw on your name and realizing it was fertile ground. So this is my message to you. If you feel overlooked, underestimated, or erased, don't fight for a seat at their table. Go build your own. Build it stronger. Build it better. And build it on the very foundation of your own undeniable talent. Let your work be the quiet thunder that shakes their world. And trust me, they will hear it. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please do me a favor and like this video, and leave a comment below sharing a time you felt underestimated. It's important to know we're not alone in these struggles. Share this with anyone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories about turning professional betrayal into ultimate victory, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It truly helps, and it lets me know that these stories matter.